Thank you, Madam President. Tomorrow marks the 20th anniversary of Operation Enduring Freedom and the beginning of those combat operations in Afghanistan. It's a benchmark that makes what has happened on the ground during and since our disastrous withdrawal from Kabul all the more disgusting. Over the past 2 months, we've listened in disbelief as mouthpieces at the State Department, the Pentagon, the White House talked about the Taliban in the same way they would have addressed a legitimate governing body. Last week, during a hearing before the Armed Services Committee, we saw our civilian and military leaders evade responsibility for the violence, death, chaos that has occurred on their watch. But we also listened closely as they revealed appalling inconsistencies between the spin from the White House and the reality of the situation on the ground. Here is the reality. Afghanistan is under the control of terrorists. These terrorists have long-standing ties with Al-Qaeda and the Haqqani network, and those relationships aren't going to take a back seat now that the Taliban is in charge of the entire country. This was no ordinary transfer of power. Afghanistan isn't Germany or France or the United States, and we shouldn't pretend that it is, because it's impossible to act as a legitimate government when your goal is not to govern, but your goal is to manipulate through acts of terror. This is what the Taliban is doing, and it's not happening in secret. The cameras are rolling, the world is watching. Inclusivity clearly isn't a priority as much as the White House would like to make out that it is. The Taliban cleared out the Women's Affairs Ministry and replaced it with, and I quote, Ministry for Preaching and Guidance and the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice, end quote. The Taliban's desire to curry favor with China has Uyghurs living in Afghanistan running scared. Afghanistan was a haven for these people during the Cultural Revolution, and now the families of those who fled are afraid that the Taliban is going to round them up. Yes, round up the Uyghur Muslims and sell them, that is right, sell them to the Chinese Communist Party in exchange for economic aid. Fears that the Taliban would weaponize access to the internet became reality before the last American left the country. They're well on their way to creating a tightly controlled online cesspool of dangerous anti-Western propaganda. Meanwhile, the Afghan economy is in the gutter. The Taliban's military campaign shut down basic commerce in much of the country, making food shortages worse and putting a million children at risk of starvation and death. Healthcare infrastructure is collapsing, and now the Afghan people are facing the possibility of blackouts because the Taliban can't be bothered to figure out how they're going to pay the electric bill. And what intel we do have suggests that Al-Qaeda will use this chaos void left by Biden's disastrous withdrawal to rebuild their operations. That's right, Al-Qaeda is present in Afghanistan. Madam President, I think it's important to understand that all of this violence and disorder barely scratches the surface of what the Taliban is capable of instigating. On August 20th, President Biden stated with absolute certainty, and I quote, I have seen no question of our credibility from our allies around the world, end quote. during last week's hearing, General Milley disagreed with that assessment. I disagree with that assessment, as do many Tennesseans that I talk with when I'm home every weekend. They understand that Operation Enduring Freedom may have come to an end, but that the world is still watching to see how the United States of America is going to respond to one of the most anti-equality, anti-peace, anti-freedom organizations on the face of the earth. Our actions and our reactions will inform those from the rest of the world, and it's time for the Biden administration to recognize that and to act accordingly. I yield the floor.